Death.
Good morning.
Morning.
How are you today, Mr. Edward Skiffington, better known as Skip? Today is February the 19th, 2008. We are at the Air and Military Museum of the Ozarks, Springfield, Missouri. My name is Warner Bullock. I will be doing the interviewing today. My privilege to do the interviewing today. Have John Aldridge assisting on the camera, and we also have Skip Skiffington, the oldest son of Skip. Good morning, Skip. Welcome to the Air and Military Museum. It's a pleasure to have you here, and as I try to tell all the gentlemen so far that I've interviewed that we appreciate your time and appreciate your efforts in the past. Tell me a little bit about yourself. You were born, as I understand, in Massachusetts. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And where?
A little town called East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Springfield, Massachusetts.
And how does that relate to Boston?
It's a little west.
West of Boston.
A little west, north of Hartford, Connecticut.
All right, that helps.
And that was where I was born in 1918, of all things.
1918.
I'll be 90 in April.
I think.
So there won't be many opportunities for this to happen again.
Well, we'll make the best of this one today.
I figure I'm programmed to go to 94.
Well, maybe we can extend it past that.
I don't want to go too far beyond it because all my friends will be gone.
Right.
You know, who would I talk to?
Right.
Who would I talk to? But I'd like to hang in there for another 4 years.
Well, I'm glad we had the opportunity today.
I have a lovely wife of 55 years, Charlotte, and 5 wonderful, wonderful children. And they're all sending money home.
They're all sending money home.
So I have no problems that way.
Is that the way it's supposed to work? The
Well,
kids
that's
send
why
money?
you have children. That's why you have children.
We're going to make an extra copy of this interview. I'm going to play it to my kids.
How many do you have?
I have 3.
3 kids.
Right.
Well,
Okay, Charlotte is your wife of 55 years.
55 years.
All right, and I understand you have the one son, Skip, who is here in town. All right, East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. How big a town? How many population?
Oh, it can't be maybe 15,000.
15,000?
It's right outside of Springfield, Massachusetts, where there is a large, or was a large, armory. There was the Springfield Armory.
Oh, that's the origin of the Springfield Armory, sure.
That's the origin of the Springfield Armory.
All right. Who made rifles and
yes.
all kinds?
Yes.
Yeah. What was it, the 1903 Springfield rifle, is that right?
I don't remember.
I think that may
really
be it.
recall.
Okay. Brothers and sisters?
I have one sister who's 89.
Okay.
She still lives in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, in the old home.
All
I
right.
had another brother, but he died at age 45.
All right.
There were 3 of us.
And are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest.
All right. 1928, you would have been in the Depression era, raised in the Depression. We visited earlier, you got involved in a program that I had not heard of called the Citizens Military Training Camps, the CMTC.
CMTC is very similar to the ROTC,
right,
which everybody knows about now. And it was in high school. You would volunteer as a high school student to go off to an Army camp. And your family, of course, was so happy that you were not at the kitchen table and that somebody else was feeding you, well, because it was a depression.
Now you say go off to a camp. Was this in the summer?
This was in the summer for 1 month. And I went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, which is up near Boston.
How did you get there?
I would be
on a train?
By train.
Okay, and the government would pay your...
They would pay for your trip up there, and they would feed you and clothe you and teach you during that month how to play soldier.
Okay.
And
Can we explore that a little bit? You went you told me earlier, 4 summers. The first summer, were you a basic trainee?
A basic trainee, a private, and I did that for the 4 years. You would do it in the summer for 4 summer camps, and then you would do a correspondence course of how to play soldier and how to win wars.
Okay.
And at the finish of that, they'd give you a little examination to see if you'd picked up what you were supposed to pick up.
Right.
And then they would commission you as second lieutenant.
Okay.
They'd put a couple of bars on your shoulders.
So you might have been 2 years out of high school when you got your second lieutenant bars.
Probably, about 23, 24.
Okay. Let me explore a little more the summer camps you went to. Who was in charge? Sergeants? Did sergeants have you?
Oh yes, they had the regular Army people, the regular Army officers, the regular Army enlisted people, and we were all privates at that time.
How many of you would be in this camp? Say your first year. Your first year, you were a private. How many privates were there? New guys.
I would say probably 5,000.
Is that right?
I would think about 5,000.
And you drilled and you did manual at arms. And
it was a big camp. Fort Devens was a big regular Army camp. Well, then I heard that there was another little Army camp up on Lake Champlain, which was up in Vermont and New Hampshire someplace. And I heard that that was sort of nice. All of the rich girls in Longmeadow. I lived in East Longmeadow. The rich people lived in Longmeadow.
Okay.
And I was aware that the rich girls went up to this Lake Champlain area and ran and played all summer long. And I thought, well, you know, I was very friendly.
There has to be an advantage to being a rich girl. Okay.
And so I asked to be sent up to this smaller camp called Fort Ethan Allen.
Okay.
Fort Ethan Allen up there in Vermont, where they trained artillerymen. Fort Devens was infantry, and Fort Ethan Allen was artillery.
Did the artillery have more appeal to you, do you think, or was it all the girls?
Oh, the girls sort of had the influence.
All right.
I didn't really know too much about artillery. You know, I had a rifle, and I was an infantryman down in Fort Devens, but when I heard that there was this opportunity to get to know some of these girls up there, I thought, well, gee, let's go.
Well, can you fill me in at all? Maybe 2 years in high school, and then you were out for a couple of years before you were commissioned. Is that right? Do you remember, were you working, or does that come back to you?
I finished my 4 summer camps, took the correspondence course, passed the exams, and they made me a second lieutenant.
Right.
Well, along came Pearl Harbor.
Okay, December of 1941.
Along came Pearl Harbor, and shortly thereafter, in March of 1942, I was called to active duty as a second lieutenant.
Well, back up just a minute. Pearl Harbor, you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor? What your thoughts were?
I was in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, there, and we had sort of heard about Hitler, and we were sort of anticipating that sooner or later there probably was going to be a war.
Right.
And my parents were very happy that I was involved in training for a possible war that was going to come.
Yeah.
And when I was called to active duty as a second lieutenant, all of my other friends who had not gone to CMTC, like I had, were going in as privates or being drafted as privates.
Can you recall how your friends looked at the fact that you had gone to these camps? Did they think it was a good thing, or thought you were foolish, or?
At the time, they didn't want to do it.
Didn't think much of it, but
very, very few of them wanted to do it.
They probably looked back and thought, well, wait a minute.
when they saw me in my uniform
right.
as a second lieutenant and they were going to be drafted as privates, they were sorry they had not done it.
Exactly. All right, in March of '42, you're called up to active duty. Where did you go?
I probably went down to Fort Devens. I probably went down
to Fort Devens.
Probably went to Fort Devens as a second lieutenant, and then Pearl Harbor came, and I was moved from different camps in the United States. As I recall, I went to different camps in the United States and trained people to fight the war that was now...
Would you have been training them in artillery?
Yes.
Artillery functions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because when I went up to Fort Ethan Allen, I had to change from infantry to artillery.
All right.
And I went from different camps to different camps for about 3 years. The war was raging in Europe and in the Pacific, and I stayed in the country for about 3 years.
Well, apparently there weren't any girls that had enough money at this point, right?
Apparently.
All right.
But I was single, and I sort of wondered, well, why aren't I being sent to Europe or to the Pacific? But I was happy, you know.
Right. Well, you do what they pretty much what they ask you to do.
And who wants to voluntarily go into combat?
Yep.
So I stayed in the United States for about 3 years, and then I was sent to England. I went to England, and I was in England when the Germans were sending the buzz bombs over London, and at that time...
Did any buzz bombs come close to where you were?
Not too close.
Not too close.
Not too close, but we were in the bars, of course. That's where people go when they're soldiers. And when the alert was sounded that a buzz bomb was coming from Germany, we would all go up to the roof. We'd all go up to the roof, and we would look for the buzz bomb to come in, and down it would go.
With disregard that it may come right where you were, so be it.
We figured, well, we might die anyway, so...
Yeah.
Now, people don't believe that story when I tell that.
Well,
and you probably don't believe it.
No, I do, because I've heard the story that Churchill was forced to go to his headquarters, underground headquarters, and he instead would go up on the roof during the bombings and watch the bombings.
I never met Churchill.
Right. That's what I understand.
But we did actually do it.
Yeah. How did you find the citizenry of Britain, and especially London, received? Were you received well by them, or were they sick of Americans by then? Or?
They were very, very nice. They were very, very nice. I'm Irish.
Okay.
And my people come from County Armagh near Belfast. And so my feeling for the English was not very good because of
the Irish English.
Because of the Irish English conflict. Some of my people, my ancestors, have said were members of the IRA, and that I used to tell my wife that one of my ancestors in Ireland was hung by the British for being an IRA activist, and she, of course, always denied that. She said, "Oh, no, that can't be true." But some years ago, some Irish singers came to Springfield, Missouri, where I live now, and during intermission they said, "Well, we're going to be out in the lobby and we'll talk to you about anything that you want to talk to us about." And I began to talk to them about it, and they said, "My God, you're a Skiffington? You are a Skiffington? He was one of our heroes fighting the British." And my wife sat there and listened to it, and she couldn't believe it.
I'll be darned.
She couldn't believe the stories that I had been telling her.
Were true. Well, the reason I ask is we've all heard the saying that what the English said there about the Americans are overpaid, oversexed, and overhere.
Well,
and I was wondering how you...
At that time, they were glad that we were over there.
Okay.
They were glad that we were
All right.
over there.
Right.
Because things were pretty bad.
Okay. How long were you in London?
Oh, I was in London probably a year.
A year. So this would bring us to 1945, early 45, mid 44, something
Probably.
like that. Okay.
Probably.
Then you got orders to go.
Well, a General Patton, General George Patton, who was fighting in Africa at the time, was brought to England. He was brought to England, and the word was that he was going to command an armored army and go in on the invasion. And we were very happy about that, because he was very, very famous, although some people didn't like him. A lot of people did, and apparently we needed somebody like that to give everybody the rah-rah team, go, 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 fight, fight, fight. And he came to England, and
Was this when was it the Phantom Army that was created?
no,
Okay.
no, he was in Africa. He was in Africa fighting the German tanks in Africa.
Okay.
But they brought him to England because there was going to be an invasion from England into France.
Correct.
And sure enough, it came, and the infantry went in first, and then Patton's Third Army of tanks went in after they had established the beachhead.
Okay.
And off we went.
You were in his Third Army now.
I was in his tank army, the Third Army. And off we went, and went into Paris.
But let me back up. Your training was as an artilleryman, but you are now with Patton's tank force.
That's correct.
Okay.
Our tanks were having such a time fighting the German tanks.
Because the German tanks were much better.
Well, they apparently were,
Right.
initially.
Okay, right.
We didn't have enough tanks when the war started and when we made the invasion. And as I recall, there was a half-track, which is sort of a truck,
Right.
and they mounted an artillery piece on the half-track. We didn't have enough tanks to fight the German tanks, and they called us then tank destroyers.
So you had an artillery piece mounted. Do you remember what the
105.
105?
A 105 artillery piece, and that would, believe it or not, challenge the German tanks that had 88.
That's where I wanted you to go.
They had 88. They had 88s, so you can imagine how many of our people were killed by the German tanks.
Let's explore that a minute for the folks that don't understand it. Our Shermans at that time had a 75 millimeter.
I think.
The Germans had an 88, which is superior, and we had trouble fighting their tanks. So we mounted 105s
105s
on a truck to fight a tank, and the advantage was bigger gun and maybe more agility to move around. Okay, that's where I wanted you to go, Skiff. All right.
That's how unprepared we were.
Okay.
Even though we knew that this Hitler was a bad guy and probably it was going to end up in war, we just didn't make enough tanks. We just sort of sat by and thought, well,
Okay.
let the English take care of Hitler. We're out of it, you know.
Right.
The feeling was that it's no concern of ours. It's no concern of ours. Let the English and the French take care of Hitler. We were not going to get involved.
Right.
Of course,
So
things changed.
unprepared.
Things started changing.
At this time, were you a captain?
I was a captain.
Captain, and you were in a tank destroyer group. How many tank destroyer vehicles would you have had under your command? Do you remember?
I probably had a company of
A company, okay.
probably a company of 4 or 5 tanks.
All right. And then how big a support group was there that you needed to have to support your 4 or 5 tank vehicle destroyer?
Our organizations were divisions.
Right.
They were divisions of maybe 20,000 men.
Okay.
And there would be these tank destroyers attached to the division.
All right.
And
now, as the tank forces would advance, and infantry, you guys were right there with them.
Right there with
Right with the tanks to help challenge the German. Okay.
That's true.
So you would, can you walk us through, if there's such a thing as a typical encounter, there'd be a German tank over here half a mile?
As we advanced, the infantry would advance, and then we would advance with them. Now, we didn't get out too far ahead of the infantry, of course, because it was sort of a team. It was sort of a team effort. And then the Germans then would withdraw because we would have more divisions attacking them, and they would sort of withdraw back into Germany. And that's how we got over into Paris.
Okay. Can you recall, here's 2 or 3 German tanks dug in or sitting there or whatever. Would somebody call on a radio and say, help, we need help, come shoot this guy? I mean, that's pretty generic way to say it.
We would have artillery spotters who were there.
Okay, that's what I want you to tell me.
Going to adjust the artillery.
Okay.
Rather than have direct tank-to-tank conflicts, we would have artillery shell the German tanks.
Okay.
And then our tanks and our infantry then would proceed.
As the battle evolved and you were advancing, there would be obviously casualties, and some of the casualties would be connected with tanks that had been destroyed, German tanks. Did you have any interest in them at all, or did you go right on by and I've got a job to do, keep on going?
The medics would take care of them.
Okay.
And we went through Paris, and then we continued to go over, and pretty soon I was in Czechoslovakia.
Okay. You're going too fast for me, Skip. You got into Paris.
Got into Paris.
How was the reception?
Oh, it was wonderful.
They love you?
Oh, it was unbelievable.
Yeah. Were you amongst the first?
We were among the first because I was with this tank army, the third army. So we were among the first to go into Paris.
Well received. Everybody loved you. Great.
There was no question about it.
Yeah.
We were the heroes. We were the heroes. But Patton said, let's go. We're going to Berlin.
How long were you in Paris?
Probably 2 days.
2 days.
Probably 2 days.
Keep on going.
And when we were in Paris, we were going to go to one of the shows in Paris that Paris was famous for, but the Germans attacked Paris, and we didn't get to go to the show.
So they were performing, they had stage shows during the war, obviously, then during the attack as the city is being fought over.
The Germans sent planes over Paris and bombed Paris. We had tickets to go to this famous show. I forget what they called it, but it was a famous show.
That's amazing. They're fighting back and forth, and they're selling amazing.
Life goes on.
Oh yeah.
Life goes on.
And by this time, they were used to it after 5 years of occupation or something. Yeah. I'll be darned. Okay, so you head over to Czechoslovakia.
We get to Czechoslovakia, and General Patton is telling everybody, we're going to take Berlin. We're going to take Berlin. I and my Third Army am going to take Berlin. And Eisenhower, who was the commanding general over there in England, flew over and met with General George Patton and said, Ike, I hear that you are telling your troops and the world that you and your Third Army are going to take Berlin. You cannot do that, George. We have promised to give Berlin to the Russians. General Patton took out his pearl-handled pistols, fired them in the air, and said, "Ike, I and my Third Army are taking Berlin." Eisenhower went back to London and told his supply people, "Don't give him any more gasoline." George didn't believe that a commanding general would do that to an army of his in the field. And he told us to keep going, keep going, keep going, and we actually ran out of gasoline somewhere over in Czechoslovakia.
Okay, that would have been after Patton relieved Bastogne.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, I went through that with Bastogne.
You were in the
We were
group
down.
that went to Bastogne.
Yes, we were down in Nancy, France. We were down in Nancy, France, and we're sort of going to go up in the underbelly of Germany when Bastogne, which was up in the north in Belgium, took place, when the Germans attacked. Well, we turned and put our flank to the Germans. Patton turned his Third Army from going in the underbelly into Germany and went north to Bastogne. And I was involved in that little skirmish.
Was the word out by that time that, I can't think of the general's name in Bastogne, that sent the word, the nuts? Had you guys heard that, or did that come out later?
That probably came out later. We were too busy to be worried about
what he said,
what people were saying.
Right. Okay. I diverted you there. Okay, let me ask you back. Did you have any letters from home? Did you receive mail?
Oh yes, we received mail.
Did you write letters back home and
sent letters back and forth? There was no problem getting mail. I was single at the time, and I was a captain, and there was no problem getting mail.
That's amazing. You know, this is off the subject a little bit, but it always amazes me when I talk to you guys that the system was in place that can do all those things. Supplies and mail and all that. Just an incredible system that did that. Okay, back to you're headed to Czechoslovakia, and take us from Czechoslovakia.
Well, when Eisenhower told his people not to give us gasoline, of course, we couldn't go any further, and so we sort of stayed in place after we actually ran out of gasoline, because Patton said, "Go, go, go, go. He won't stop us from fighting." There were Germans all around, but he did. And so we sort of stayed there. And then that was about it. Hitler had pretty much been defeated by that time. His last effort was up in Bastogne when he attacked, and he was going to go into Belgium. But we took care of that.
Where were you the day the war was over?
Don't remember.
Don't remember.
Don't remember.
Busy doing things.
Somewhere in Czechoslovakia.
Okay. Did you told me earlier part of your job was I guess what you would call a liaison, carrying messages. You and two or three guys in a jeep, and you also tell us a little bit about the time that the 9 or 10 German soldiers came up to you? Or?
In World War II, I didn't really get into combat. I was what they called a liaison officer, who carried messages between the headquarters. And I had my little jeep and radio in the jeep and a couple of enlisted men, a sergeant, and we would run messages between the headquarters, because they didn't want to send all these messages over the radio. They were afraid that the enemy would intercept the messages. But that was a very, very dangerous job. And my son has a picture of me going down the road in Germany, and we stopped the jeep at the time, and I walked back, and the sergeant driving my jeep took a picture. took a picture of me beside a German tank that had been knocked out. Well, you can see that I was out there in the country all alone. Well, one time, towards the end of the war, I went by a woods, and 10 Germans armed with their rifles and machine guns came out and stopped us and said, "We want to surrender, we want to surrender." It was towards the end of the war.
Was there, as they approached you or you approached them, was their posture threatening at that time, or could you tell these guys don't want to fight? Or
Well, they wanted to surrender.
yeah, so they were not in a.
I didn't know whether they wanted to fight
Right.
or not, but they knew apparently that the war was over, and so they wanted to surrender
Okay.
rather than to be killed.
Right.
But they had their rifles, and they stopped us. Well, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't.
You're on a
take-
mission.
I had a mission, and so I said, "No, no, no, no. You just stay right here, and the MPs who are coming up behind me will take care of you." Well, they could have just said, "Well,
Yeah.
you know," but they didn't. And so why I am going to be 90 in April, am here to tell these stories,
Right.
I don't know.
Amazing. Maybe the reason is you're supposed to be here telling the story.
Maybe that's it.
That might be it. Okay, the war ends. You're somewhere in Czechoslovakia. Did you stay in the European area right after the war? Or?
I stayed there in that area for about a year.
And this was some kind of reconstruction was going on. What were you doing?
Well, just helping, just occupying Germany,
Right.
occupying the enemy, and about
Well-
a year later,
Well, let me ask you a question. While you were there, were the Germans friendly, reconciled to defeat, glad to be over with?
the majority of the Germans said, "Oh, we had no part in it. We had no part in it. We were not Hitler
Right.
fans." You know, they all, that was,
Sure.
you know, nobody
yeah.
in Germany,
Ever liked him?
and it was obvious that the mothers, that the fathers and the brothers were involved.
Right.
Because I haven't brought this up earlier, but as we went through Germany, I came upon the death camps.
Yeah.
I came upon the death camps, and when we went into them, we couldn't believe what we saw. There were ovens and ovens and ovens, and they were filled with human beings. The human beings were being burned.
Right.
They were being burned.
Right.
We went into some of the buildings where they had showers, and the poor people that were there told us that they were so happy that the Germans were going to let them take showers. And so they said that the people before them went into the shower rooms to take showers, and instead of water, gas came out of the spigots. And as the people collapsed on the shower floors, the German soldiers took the bodies and put them in the ovens.
Yeah.
They put them in the ovens. And then these camps were filled with emaciated looking men, women, and children. And when we saw it, we couldn't believe it. We just, it was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I went through 2 or 3, Dachau and Buchenwald, and 2 or 3 other death camps.
A huge task. How do we as the liberators handle that? Just a huge task.
It was just unbelievable. But we couldn't take it out on the German people. We couldn't kill the mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers.
Yeah.
You know, we.
Yeah. So
they all claimed that they had no part of it, but obviously they had to.
Yeah.
Their husbands and their sons must have, and their brothers must have told them what was going on.
But you just have to go on. It is what it is, and I guess you go on. All right, you spend a year over there. This has been take us into about 1946 or so. What'd you do after that?
I was single, and it took some time to get the troops back to the United States on ships, so that was the delay. We couldn't immediately get on a ship and go home.
Well, you said you were single. Did that make any difference whether you were single or married? Did they try to get married people back first?
I don't even remember whether they did or not.
Okay.
I was single, and I really wasn't concerned about the married
Didn't
people.
much care.
I didn't. Don't put it that way.
I know.
Don't put it that way.
Okay.
But I had to wait about a year, and then after that year, I went back to the United States, and I was single at the time, and I thought, well, this isn't a bad life. You know, it's a little dangerous. It's a little dangerous, but you know, it's sort of fun.
Yeah. Adventurous and
if you can say that
get some pay,
about war.
Right.
And I hadn't been hit. I hadn't been hurt.
Had you had any awards in the meantime?
No awards, because I really didn't do anything that was heroic. I ran this liaison back and forth. It was dangerous.
Right.
So I get back to the United States, and I go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Had you ever been to Oklahoma before?
No.
What's the furthest west you'd ever been when you went to Oklahoma?
Probably Connecticut.
Connecticut. All right.
But I got out there at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I stayed there for about 3 years.
You got there on a train.
Got there on a train, and they put me, even though I was a reserve officer, sort of Christmas help. I wasn't a West Pointer.
Yeah.
I wasn't
exactly.
I wasn't an ROTC from Texas A&M.
Right.
I was a reserve officer, CMTC.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect to get any good assignments in the regular Army, but they put me at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and they put me in training artillerymen in the school. And I stayed there at Fort Sill for about 3 years. It was wonderful, a permanent Army camp with an officers' club, with golf courses.
What was the nearest town? I'm trying to think where Fort Sill is. Not Lawton, was it?
Lawton.
Lawton. Okay.
Lawton. The biggest city was Oklahoma City, but south of Lawton was Lawton, or south of Oklahoma City was Lawton and Fort Sill.
Then Fort Sill, okay.
So I stayed there for 3 years, and then the Pentagon wrote to me and said, "You're due for an overseas tour. You've been here in the United States for 3 years now."
So we're up to about 1949.
Yes. And I said, "Well, I've been in Europe, but why don't you send me to the Far East? I'd like to see some of the world." So they complied, and off I go to Japan. And I get to Japan in 1949. And I'm assigned to an artillery battalion. There were no tank destroyers there in Japan. And there's an infantry regiment that's all black. And the artillery is all black. But and when I tell people this, they say, no, Skiff. Truman integrated the military in 1946 or 45. Well, they integrated the officers of this regiment.
Okay.
And I was from Massachusetts, and I had seen some black citizens, and I thought, well, okay.
But you're undergoing a cultural enlightening or awakening or a change or whatever. Okay.
Yes, because of the officers now that are integrated, half of the officers are white and half of the officers are black. Well, I'm from the north, and I thought, well, okay. I'd seen black citizens, and I had a certain attitude towards them. But then there was the white officer from the south whose ancestors had had slaves, and he had complete different opinions about these black enlisted men. Well, then there was the black officer from the south who'd always been in the south, and when he saw a white man, he bowed down because he didn't want to get hung or whipped. Then there was the black officer from the south who had gone north and spent some years in the north, and when he saw a white man, So here are these 4 different types of officers commanding these all black enlisted men, you know.
And then on top of that, you've got the blacks from the North and the South, whose lives were totally or substantially different. A real challenge to make it work. And this is going on across the whole world.
We're in 49 in Japan. The war's over in Europe and in Japan, and we're in the armies of occupation. Well, a year later, the North Koreans...
Let back up 1 minute. I keep interrupting you.
Back up.
All right.
Back up.
What are you thinking? You go into this situation and you've got all these different cultural aspects. You thinking, what in the world am I doing here? Or this is a challenge, I'll make it work? Or
I thought, well, why am I assigned to an all-black artillery battalion supporting an all-black regiment?
okay.
And then I thought, well, CMTC, not West Point,
Right, as opposed to
not Texas A&M,
right.
CMTC, that's why I'm here.
Do you think that truly was the reason?
I have no idea.
No idea.
And
Were there guys?
who would I ask? Who would I ask?
Were there guys similar to you there in the same situation?
That were regular?
Yes.
There were.
Okay, so it wasn't necessarily picking on a reserve guy, but still, you got to wonder. As you say, not West Point, not A&M. Okay, go ahead. I'm leading you here, but
I wondered, but I mean, what could you do?
yeah, right.
I thought, well, I've got a job, and so I stayed there with them in Japan, and then a year later, the North Koreans went south of the 38th.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about the invasion from the north?
I was
I mean, other than in Japan, were you in the...
Osaka. There's a city in southern Japan called Osaka, and that's where our regiment and the artillery battalion was stationed.
But were you at work when you heard this, or in the BOQ, or do you may not remember? Okay.
I don't remember.
All right. So the North Koreans have invaded, and then take us from there.
Over we went, right away.
Loaded on a boat.
Loaded on a boat, over we went.
What was the feeling of you emotionally and the troops that all of a sudden we're going to war?
We didn't, I mean, what do you do?
You've been to war.
I've been to war.
How many of your group of officers and how many of your group of enlisted had been in a war?
I have no way of knowing.
No, you don't know.
I have no way of knowing. Obviously there were some.
Right.
Now, whether there were more or less, I don't really know.
Okay.
But over we go, and we land in a port called Busan, and we go up to stop the North Koreans from occupying South Korea. But they drove us down to the port of Busan.
How long, time-wise, do you think it was from the time you were ordered to go from Japan till you got to Busan?
Oh.
Week, 2 weeks, a month?
Probably 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay. Then you start the march or the drive to the north.
They drive us south.
Another 2 weeks to get up north, 3 weeks, a month?
Yeah.
Okay, then you start back down south. Okay.
Then we get down to this port of Busan, and we look out to the sea for them to pick us up. No ships. No ships.
Surrounded by communists.
Coming down, we held on, and years later, I'm at Norfolk Naval Base, and I asked one of these Navy commanders, where were you when we were in the Busan perimeter and North Korea were pushing us down? And then, of course, the Chinese had come in then, too. And he said, well, we heard you. We were off. You couldn't see us, but we were off, and we heard on the radios what was happening to you people. And we thought, why doesn't the Admiral order us in and save you? But apparently he didn't want another Dunkirk. And that was when the Germans drove the English and the French to the English Channel, but all of the English sent their boats over to save the people.
Right.
And he said we couldn't understand it, but the admiral didn't do it. Anyway, back to Pusan we held, and then MacArthur brought some troops from the United States, and he landed up in the north, up around Incheon and Seoul, and the North Koreans didn't want to get trapped, so they withdrew.
Okay.
They withdrew. As they withdrew, we went north.
Okay, can you remember how you're surrounded in Pusan? How big an area was held by Americans? 20-mile radius, 50-mile radius,
Oh,
10-mile?
Probably 10 miles.
10-mile radius.
Only,
You're cramped in.
probably only about 10,
You're
10
cramped
miles.
in.
But we held on, and I don't know how we did it. And I don't know how.
But there was somebody coming in bringing ammunition and so on to support you some, and
We had what we had, and that
didn't
was
come
it.
to rescue you. Yeah.
Nobody came to rescue us.
What was the climate like when you were at Pusan? Was it summer, winter? You remember?
I don't remember.
Okay.
But we did spend time in Korea in the winter.
In the terrible winters, I guess.
We moved up to the 38th parallel line. That's the line between North Korea and South Korea and the international border. We moved up there as the North Koreans withdrew. And we spent about a week there, and then the colonel came in one morning and said, okay, pack up, pack up, pack up, we're going. And we said, hey, and we grabbed our Japanese beer and said, back to Osaka and our musumes.
Musumes.
Musumes, that's Japanese for women.
It doesn't surprise me you said that.
And remember, at the time I was single.
Okay.
I was not married, and so anything, you know. But the colonel said no, and he pointed like this. And we said, what? And he said, well, I don't know, that's the order, go north. We went north, and as we went north, a Chinese Tokyo Rose over the radio kept saying, fellas, don't go north of that 38th, because if you do, our boys will come in and throw you out. And we used to laugh, but we went up and got up to the Yalu, and her prediction came true. They came in, and they came in the mountains on either side of us. We were tied to the roads. They came in either side of us and came down, and oh, did they butcher our people.
You were tied to the roads because?
Tanks, trucks,
Okay.
tied to the roads.
And they came in as infantry?
On foot.
On
On
foot.
foot. On foot. On either side by the millions. And oh, did they slaughter our people.
Did you lose a lot of men going up before they came in?
No.
Not many men.
Not many
You were
men.
chasing the...
We were chasing the North Koreans.
Okay.
And they sort of withdrew.
All right. So
Because I guess they knew that the Chinese were going to come in to help them.
Then all of a sudden the complexion of the situation
Oh.
changes and you're surrounded millions of these Chinese.
And what were the total dead in Korea? Some 45 or 50,000 of
Right.
our men died
Right.
in that exercise.
Right.
And we
So-
get up to the Yalu, and then they came, and so we get down
Was that in the winter?
in the winter.
Okay, and you're going back south, retreating. Isn't a good word, but retreating.
We called it bugged out. We called it. We weren't yellow. We just couldn't
Withstand.
withstand or fight that many people. And so we went south of Seoul, and by that time MacArthur had gotten some more troops from the United States, and he landed with them up in Incheon, right near Seoul. Then the North Koreans withdrew, and the Chinese withdrew.
Let me ask you this, if you'll go there with me. When you were retreating, you were able to provide medical care? What about recovering the dead? Do
I
you
would
remember?
pick up the dead and the wounded and put them in my trailer. I had a trailer attached to my Jeep,
Okay.
and I would pick up the dead and the wounded. And other people did the same thing as we're bugging out south.
Okay, you say bugging out. A lot of people would think bugging out meant running like hell.
That's what we did.
You were running like hell, only in a wheeled vehicle.
In a sort of orderly fashion.
Okay.
And we bugged out, and we picked up as many of our people as we could.
Was it panic or semi-panic?
It was sort of semi-panic.
Semi-panic. Get the hell out of here.
Yes.
But trying to still bring the wounded and the dead out with you.
And I was with all black troops except for the officers. And many of them abandoned their weapons, abandoned their vehicles, their jeeps. And that, of course, hurt all of us. That hurt all of us.
What were they doing? Walking south?
Running south.
Running south.
Throwing away their weapons, abandoning their jeeps. Some years later, the Department of the Army wrote a book, a paperback book called Black Soldier, White Army. And in that paperback book, they told what happened. And I was surprised that the Department of the Army would publish such a book, because if any black mother or father or brother or sister read it, they would be ashamed of the black soldier.
Well, you experienced the withdrawal with the blacks. Do you think the whites did the same thing?
I have no knowledge.
You have no knowledge.
I was not with the whites.
Okay.
I do know that on a number of occasions, as we were being overrun, as the blacks were withdrawing, that a white regiment came in and took their place. I remember that.
Well, let me ask you this: you're surrounded. You're being shot at. Obviously, where did you get ammunition? Fresh ammunition? You had enough.
We had enough supplies.
Or never enough, but
we had ample. There was no problem there.
All right.
And as these black troops, many of whom were fleeing south, I was sort of a hero, for which I received 2 silver stars and a bronze star.
For your action in this retreat?
Because I was an artillery observer,
so we
firing artillery as these Chinamen were coming towards us. I couldn't leave. It was like being at Fort Sill.
So there is.
As I was out there, a regiment of whites came up, and the colonel said, "What are you doing out here, Skiffington? This is a no man's land." And I received 2 silver stars and a bronze star.
Well, you're doing this. We're retreating, but at the same time there was some artillery that was close enough that they could help you. Let me ask you a question aside. You are picking up our dead and wounded. What did the Chinese do with their thousands? They just leave them? They didn't care? Did they?
I have no way.
You have no knowing whether they picked them up or not?
I have no way of knowing that.
Okay. All right, so you retreat. At some point the retreat was over. Was that when the retreat stopped? Was that when they came to Incheon?
When MacArthur and the troops from the United States came to Japan, they landed up around Incheon near Seoul, which was occupied by the North Koreans and the Chinese.
Right.
And they were able to drive them north.
Correct.
Drive them north.
Okay.
And all through all of this, I was never wounded. I was
never 2 silver stars and a bronze star and no Purple Heart.
Unbelievable.
Amazing.
Unbelievable.
Well, you'd be the guy they'd want to serve with, right, real close to you.
Now, why God has done this to me, I want to thank Him.
Well,
I want to thank Him.
He wanted you to be here today.
And I'm going to be 90 in April.
So
He must have something in mind for me to do here on earth before He takes me.
That's to be here today.
Maybe
how long were you in Korea?
About a year and a half. About a year and a half.
Year and a half. You were in Korea about a year and a half. What is the time frame from when you got to Pusan and started north, and then you retreated back down? How long a time was that? 2 months or 6 weeks or 5 months? Do you have any remember?
I don't really
Don't remember.
I really don't remember.
All right. So at this point, the retreat has pretty well ended, or has ended. They're coming in at Incheon, and I think we'll pick up there next time, Skip.
Very
All right.
good.
Thank you. Good morning. Today is February the 28th, 2008. We are back at the Air and Military Museum of the Ozark in Springfield, Missouri, and finishing up today from our previous conversation with Skiffington. Good morning, Skip.
Morning.
Welcome back. When we finished up last time, we were talking about the end of your time in Korea, and I want to take up on that, but right now I'd like to talk about the flag we have behind us that you brought in. That's obviously a Nazi flag from Germany, your time you spent over there. Tell us a little bit about where you got it, how you came about to get it, and so on.
Well, in World War II, I was with the Third Army of General George Patton, and I was running liaison between the headquarters at that time in a Jeep. I had a sergeant and a Jeep with a radio, and I ran liaison between the headquarters with messages which they wanted to deliver rather than send over the radio, because they were afraid that the Germans would intercept the radio and know about our plans to attack or withdraw or do whatever. And it was a rather dangerous game, because I was out on the roads coming and going in my Jeep. But fortunately I was able to get through that in World War II with Patton's Third Army. But as we were going into these German towns, after we were conquering the German, the military police would tell the mayor of the towns that he should tell all of the people of the town to bring all of their Hitler memorabilia into the town square. Pictures of Hitler, pictures of...
So who was telling them this?
Our military police people would tell the mayor,
Okay.
the German mayor of the town.
So obviously we had military police that would speak German.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And they were with the infantry all the time. And so when the mayor of the town told all of his people to bring whatever they had concerning Hitler, they would. Now, some of them, of course, would save certain things and hide it from our people, but a lot of them did what they were told to do. And this was one of the flags that was in the center of one of the towns, probably Nuremberg.
Okay.
There was a lot of activity in Nuremberg, and I was in the armored forces that conquered Nuremberg. And I probably went down to the town hall and took whatever I saw there that I was interested in.
Did you take a lot of stuff or a little stuff?
Oh, I took quite a bit of stuff. I had a brother who was back home in Massachusetts who was 10 years younger than I was, and I sent things to him. I would pick up weapons of all kinds. I've got all kinds of weapons in my attic. I've got all kinds of things that I just picked up and told my sergeant to pack it up and send it back home to Massachusetts. And I have all of these things like this in my attic. And someday when I'm gone, and of course it might be a matter of time. I'm going to be 90 in April,
yeah.
so...
It's a matter of time for all of us, but hopefully we won't have it on the clock today. Okay.
Not for a while, but I have 5 children, and some of them may want these things, but they probably will give them to some museum. like this one.
Okay.
They probably, rather than throwing them away or selling them, they probably will give them to some museums like this, because I have a lot of real treasures.
You think the town was Nuremberg when you got it?
I believe that is correct.
Did the people seem anxious to get rid of this stuff, or were they just accommodating a conqueror?
No, the German people did what they were told when we went into their homes. Frequently we would go into a city, and during a break in the firing, we would go into their homes and tell them to get out, and we would be living there.
Just like that?
Just like that.
Get out?
Rather than living in tents or out in the open someplace, we would go into their homes, and they'd be very nice about it, of course. We were the conquerors. We had the guns.
Right.
And they couldn't argue about it. And they would leave and go and live with somebody else, and we would take over their homes. And
so you had all this stuff. Were a lot of the other guys, a lot of our other troops taking it also, and
oh yes,
sending it home?
A lot of them did, and of course a lot of them didn't. A lot
Right.
of them
Couldn't care less.
They couldn't care less. They didn't
Right.
have any brothers or anybody that they wanted to send it home to.
Well,
but I sent a lot of things.
I'd go on record as saying this flag looks in just pristine condition.
Yeah.
I don't see any holes in it or anything. It's
Well, I've been pretty proud of it, and I show it to everybody, of course.
right.
And everybody's amazed by it. It's one of the biggest flags that I have seen.
It is. Yeah.
It's one of the big.
You know, we've had a couple brought in here, and people
Yeah.
showed us, and this is bigger than any and in better condition.
Nuremberg was one of the big areas where they had all of the assemblies in the.
It was the
big center of their
political
activity.
or psychological center of the Nazi regime. Right. Right, it was.
And so that's why it's so big.
All right. And they had so many parades and all. It'd be interesting to know the whole background of it, where it had been and when it was used and so
That's
on.
beyond me.
Oh yeah, exactly. But a lot of history right there.
Yes.
Well, we thank you for bringing it in. All right. We left off last time. I think you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, that you had spent a year and a half in Korea. And when did you leave Korea?
Well, let's go back to when I began.
Okay.
I had been in Europe in World War II, and I came up for another overseas tour a few years later after having spent some years in the States. And I asked to go to the Far East. I had no idea that the Korean War was going to come, or I wouldn't have asked for that assignment. But I got to Japan in '49. I was single, and I was a captain, and I'd been through World War II and wasn't in too much combat. But I got to Japan, and a year later, the North Koreans went south of the 38th parallel line that separated the North from the South.
Right.
And we got over there, and we were driven down into South Korea all the way down to a port called Pusan,
Correct.
the Pusan perimeter. And we looked out to the sea to have the Navy come in and save us the way the English went into Dunkirk in World War II and saved them when the Germans drove the French and English army to the English Channel. The English people used all their boats and went over and took the English and
Right.
French troops to safety back in England. So we were in Pusan, and we were looking out for the Navy, our Navy, to do that for us. No Navy, no Navy, no Navy. We were able to hold on. Years later, I was in Norfolk, and I was talking to some of the Navy officers, and I told them what I was telling you just now. And they said, well, we were off, and we heard over the radio what was happening to you people, and we thought, why doesn't the admiral ordered us in to save them, but he didn't. We apparently assumed that the admiral didn't want another Dunkirk. He didn't want another Dunkirk. And
Which I always thought Dunkirk was a positive experience.
well, he apparently didn't think so, and I, of course, would like to have met that admiral. Because we were able to hold on.
Right.
We were able to hold on, and I'm lucky to be able to tell you this story years later. But eventually, General MacArthur brought troops from the United States, and they landed up in the Seoul area
Incheon.
and Incheon,
Right.
and the North Koreans then withdrew. They didn't want to get trapped, and so they withdrew. And as they withdrew, we left Pusan and sort of followed them up to the 38th parallel line. And we were there about 2 weeks, and the colonel came in one morning and said, "Okay, pack up, pack up, pack up." And we all laughed and said, "Oh, good, we're going to go back to Japan." And the colonel shook his head and pointed his finger. And we said, "What?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, but that's the command. We're going to attack north." Well, we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it because that was the international border, and we had no more right to go north than the North Koreans had to go south. But MacArthur was in Japan, in Tokyo, and he probably said, "Well, we'll punish those North Koreans for going south." So we went north, and as we went north, a Chinese Tokyo Rose type of girl kept playing music for us, and she kept saying in English, "Now fellas, don't go north of that 38th parallel line, because if you do, our boys will come in and throw you out." And we used to laugh and drink our Japanese beer. We certainly weren't going to go north of that international border.
Right.
But we did. And we got up to the Yalu River, and I could have gone swimming in the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China. And in the Chinese came by the millions, by the millions. We were tied to the roads with our tanks and trucks. They came in on foot down the mountains on either side of us and would come down every now and then and block the road. And oh, they killed our people, they killed our people. It's amazing. And
Did you guys killed a lot of them?
we tried to.
Right.
We tried to, but we were tied to the roads, and we were sort of concerned with getting our trucks and our tanks back and sort of escaping from them. We did kill some of them, but they killed many, many, many more, I'm sure, of our people. History has established that probably 45,000 of our people were killed. We eventually got back down to Seoul, the international border, and by that time we had brought a lot of troops from the United States, and so they came in and they were able to hold the Chinese. The Chinese captured Seoul and moved down to the Han River south of Seoul, and then we were able to hold them there and drove them north of that 38th parallel and out of Seoul.
Well, you experienced a lot of combat in Europe, and you obviously experienced a lot of combat in Korea. Was the fighting different? Was it a different type of war, or is infantry war ever different?
I wasn't really in combat in World War II. I ran liaison in my Jeep with my sergeant and corporal and radio, delivering messages back and forth. So I wasn't in combat, as you would understand combat. Infantry,
Right.
artillery.
But still, you were on the front lines.
Well, yeah.
Exposure to the enemy.
Well, yeah, but I wasn't
Okay.
in combat.
Okay.
In other words,
All
you
right.
can't really say, I can't brag on it, so to speak.
Okay.
But in Korea, I really got into it.
You were.
I really got into it. I was a artillery officer, and I was up at the front line all the time as a forward observer. I was a forward observer, observing artillery. I was observing artillery. And I was with an artillery battalion that supported an infantry regiment.
Okay.
And so there, I was in combat. And
You were certainly shot at and
oh,
artillery at,
yes,
if that's
yes.
a word.
No question about it. We exchange as goodies. And as a result of my actions in Korea, I have 2 Silver Stars and a Bronze Star for valor.
That's very good.
2 Silver Stars and a Bronze Star for valor.
We appreciate that. I'm sure they were.
And
I don't know if you earned them or not. I think you earned them.
I earned them, and
That's
I wear them proudly.
And you should. All right, you retreated, I guess is the right word, back. Then you said the troops came in from America, obviously, at some point, came in and we stopped the Chinese. Did we have a stalemate there at that point?
There was a stalemate, and it went on for years.
And so you're back, they're stopped, you quit retreating. What did you do then?
Well,
were you in a camp, or did you get to leave, or?
Well, we lived in tents. We lived in tents because in Korea there were not many homes, so we lived in tents.
And the intensity of the life had changed from being in a horrible situation of retreating to where you were stationary, or more or less stationary. Okay, and you lived in a tent.
And it was just a matter of time, we thought, before we'd be rotated back to Japan.
You've been there a year and a half.
About a year and a half.
Okay.
I was in Korea about a year and a half.
Do you remember when you left?
Don't remember the exact date.
Spring, summer, fall? Don't remember. All right. You joined in 1942, and this is about 1952 or so.
Yes.
You're 10 years in the military. You came back to the U.S. What did you do then?
I came back to the United States, and I was single, and I was a captain. By that time, I was a captain, and I was assigned to Camp Carson, Colorado, right outside of Colorado Springs. Well, my home was in Massachusetts, so being in Colorado was a new experience for me. But Camp Carson then was a big Army post where they were training artillery troops to go to Korea, where I had just come back from.
Right.
And there were about 10 battalions of artillery. I was an artilleryman. There were about 10 battalions of artillery in Camp Carson.
In round numbers, how many men in a battalion?
Oh, probably 3,000.
Okay, so we got 30,000 troops being trained. All right, go ahead.
And the artillery battalion supported infantry regiments.
Okay.
And infantry divisions. An infantry division would be about 25,000 troops, an infantry division.
Okay.
And so
battalion's the biggest.
Yes.
Then you have a division.
Well, they had batteries of artillery. Batteries, they call them batteries.
Which is a whole bunch.
Which is yes.
Several. Okay.
Couple of hundred.
Okay.
Men that man the howitzers that are firing.
Okay.
And I came back from Korea, and here I am with 2 Silver Stars and a Bronze Star. And as I reported to the commanding officer of that organization, a full colonel, he said, "Well, now, Skiffington, we have an artillery battalion that is training to go to Korea, and they were inspected by 6th Corps a couple of months ago, and they were completely unsatisfactory. They were completely unsatisfactory."
And how long had they been training when they were?
Probably 6 months, 8 months.
6 months, and they were unsatisfactory.
They were unsatisfactory, and this inspection team told the colonel that they were going to be re-inspected in 2 or 3 months, that they would come back and re-inspect that battalion.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Skip, again, but why were they unsatisfactory? Look, was it because they couldn't hit something with the artillery? It was okay.
Yeah.
It was in their function of firing.
Everything. Firing the artillery, their motor parks were unsatisfactory, their mess halls were unsatisfactory, their barracks were unsatisfactory. They were just a big U.
And then right next door, so to speak, there might be a really great battalion.
Exactly.
This one was not satisfactory. Okay, I'm
So the
trying to
colonel
lead you
said,
here.
Skiffington, I'm going to assign you to a battalion, this battalion that I'm talking about, that's going to be re-inspected in a couple of months. And a colonel is coming in from the Pentagon to take over that battalion. At that time, I was a major. I'd been promoted from captain to major in Korea.
Okay.
And a lieutenant colonel normally commands a battalion of artillery. And so the colonel told me that I was going to command this battalion for a couple of months until this new colonel came in.
So you're going to be an interim commander, CO of
this
this
battalion.
battalion, okay?
This battalion of artillery.
And one of the worst on the base.
Yes. So I go down to the battalion and I tell the sergeant major and the executive officer to assemble the battalion in the theater that I want to talk to them.
Let me interrupt again. The sergeant major is the main enlisted guy.
The main enlisted man.
And the XO, who would be
A major.
between him and you.
And I was a major, and he was a major, but I outranked him
Okay.
at the time. Well, they did. In a couple of days, they assembled the battalion in the theater. I get up on the stage, and I looked at all of the officers in the front row. There were 40 officers in the front row, and probably 400 or 500 men in the theater. And I tell them that now I'm wearing your crest, the 538th Field Artillery Battalion. And I said, I have just come back from Korea, and I expect that most of you will be going to Korea. And I said, I want you to know that I can't make a good artillery battalion out of you. You have to do your job to the best of your ability. Those forward observers among you have to know how to adjust artillery. Those gunners on the howitzers have to know their jobs. The people in the mess halls, the people in the barracks. You have to do it. I can't do it. You have to do it. And I'd be very, very proud if you did. And I walked off the stage.
The psychology was have them do it themselves instead of you're going to kick their behinds, which you could try, but you can't really make it work. They've got to do it.
2 months later, the 6th Corps artillery inspectors came down and inspected the battalion. And the next afternoon, we were all assembled in the same theater. All of the battalion was there, and the colonel and all of his staff were up on the stage, and I was up on the stage, and my officers were with my people in the front. And the colonel who was in charge of the inspection team turned to Colonel Strobene, his name at the time, I remember that. He said, Colonel, I don't know what has happened to this battalion, but the last time we inspected them, we were considering disbanding them and sending all of their people to the other battalions. But now, this battalion is one of your best. All of the men cheered. All of the men cheered.
Do you think it was because you came with some authenticity, you'd been there, done that, and they better believe you? Or
because I asked them to do it.
to do it?
Those of you who are in the howitzer sections, the mess halls, the motor parks, I didn't command them to do it. I asked them. Unbelievable.
And it worked.
Unbelievable in the military. Even if I do say so. Even if I do say so.
So they are kept together because they are now a good battalion.
After we go back to the headquarters, the sergeant major comes in and said, Major, the colonel wants to see you right away at his headquarters. I go up, report in to Colonel Strobing. I remember his name after all these years. I remember his name. And he says, Skiffington, God damn it, what a job. You remember that Lieutenant Colonel I said was coming in from the Pentagon to take over that battalion? I've reassigned him to some other battalion. You are going to command the 538th Field Artillery Battalion.
As a major, you're going to take a lieutenant colonel's job.
At that time, I was a major.
But isn't that, did that mean that you would be going to Korea again?
No.
No?
I was going to be kept in the United States for a certain length of time. I was going to be kept, and I was, as I told you earlier, sent to Camp Carson, Colorado.
Okay. You've assumed command of the
538th Field Artillery.
538th Field Artillery, Lieutenant Colonel slot. That didn't look bad on your performance reports, did it?
No, and I was a reserve officer, as you recall from my earlier testimonies.
Right.
I came up from Citizens Military Training Camp, CMTC. I didn't come from West Point. I didn't come from Texas A&M ROTC. I was sort of Christmas help.
Right.
I was sort of Christmas help.
That had to make you feel good for a number of reasons, but particularly because you didn't come from one of the trade schools.
And I stayed there at Camp Carson, Colorado, and I was single at the time. And of course, I was interested in girls.
Well, that's healthy.
And I went into Colorado Springs, and I found my present wife of 55 years.
Great.
Charlotte Skiffington.
Charlotte. And what was Charlotte doing when you met her?
Well,
running from GIs?
No. I went into the officers' club at Camp Carson, Colorado, one night after work with a couple of other officers, and we went into the bar. And who was there in the bar sitting at a little table but two young ladies. And because I was so lonely, and I'd been in all the wars, I became friendly with my present wife, Charlotte. And we have been married for 55 years and have 5 wonderful children who are sending money home every month.
They're sending money to you. Is that right?
Well, not
at least they're not asking for money, apparently.
Not really.
All right. Charlotte is from Colorado Springs.
Born in Colorado Springs.
Okay.
A beautiful, beautiful country. For those of you that have not been there, you ought to get out there and see the mountains, and
beautiful part of the country.
Oh, it's just unbelievable.
Okay. Well, so you're sitting there, you meet Charlotte, she lives in town, and at some point you get a date with her, and at some point you go to her house and meet
her family.
Meet her family. She had brothers or sisters? And this would be about 1953?
Yes.
Something like that, all right.
And about this time, I come up for another overseas tour. I'd been in Japan fighting the wars over there in Korea, and I came back to Camp Carson, and I'd been there for a couple of years, and here I am with Charlotte, And here I'm ordered to go overseas again.
What was the time frame between when you met Charlotte and when you had to go overseas?
Don't really remember.
Well, long time, short time?
Oh, short.
Relatively short, okay.
A relatively short time. Big decision. Do I go back to Europe? And I wanted to go back to Europe. I didn't want to go back to Japan and Korea. So I asked the Pentagon to send me back to Europe, where I'd been in World War II.
Right.
Big decision. What to do with Charlotte? Here I am, no rings. What should I do? I decided to get a ring and to ask her to marry me.
Okay, was she aware you were approaching that decision?
She probably was.
Okay.
She probably was.
All right.
And she accepted.
Yeah.
She accepted, and we were married right there in Colorado Springs at Camp Carson.
All right.
At Camp Carson.
Probably the chapel or...
We were married right there. They had a beautiful, beautiful officers club, and we were married right there. We were married in a chapel. They didn't have a chapel. They may have had a chapel on the post, but because she lived in Colorado Springs, she was a parishioner at St. Mary's. I'm Roman Catholic. She was too. So we were married right there at St. Mary's, in the shadow of Pikes Peak.
Nice.
Pikes Peak. My officers were there with their swords. When we came out of the church, we were all in uniform.
Sure. Great.
It was like a TV show.
Exactly. So you won the heart of the Colorado Springs girl. You have orders to go to Europe, and this is 1954, 55 maybe.
Well, probably 53.
53.
52,
Right.
53.
Does Charlotte go with you?
You couldn't take your family over to Europe until you got over there and got quarters. And so...
Government quarters or on the local?
Government quarters.
Okay, go ahead.
So I go over to Europe alone. Leave my wife in Colorado Springs. Once you got over there in Germany, if you couldn't get on post housing, which they had in these posts over in Europe, they had on post housing like they had in the United States, you could get off post housing. Once you got off post housing, you could send for your family. And that's what I did. I immediately got off post housing, sent for Charlotte, and over she came.
Was one type housing preferred over the other?
Oh, well,
by the troops.
Oh, yeah, you preferred to live on post.
On post,
You
okay.
preferred to live on post,
Okay,
but you could get off-post housing.
okay.
And I got off-post housing and immediately sent for Charlotte, and she came over.
Okay. Here comes a young bride with no household possessions, 2 or 3 suitcases, and goes to Europe. Had she ever been out of the country before?
I don't believe so.
Don't you have? All right.
I don't
So
believe so.
you've got housing on the Germany. What town was this?
It was a town outside of Stuttgart called Gmund. It was a little German army post there in Gmund, and the army, our army, took it over. And we lived in Gmund, and I did my duty in this little...
How big a city was Gmund?
Oh, maybe 10,000.
All right. You had an army base there. How many people at the base?
Oh, probably 4,000.
What was your job?
It was outside of Stuttgart.
Right.
Outside, that's the big known town.
Right. What was your job?
My job was artillery battalion executive. By that time I was a major, and the battalion of artillery was commanded by a lieutenant colonel. So I worked for Lieutenant Colonel Fahey. See, after all these years, I remembered his name.
Exactly.
Lieutenant Colonel Fahey.
At that time, was the Cold War intense between Russia and the U.S.?
No, we weren't.
So you didn't have much worry about that or anything?
We weren't.
What was the job of a 4,000-man unit of artillery in Germany in 1953?
We trained. They had a artillery range and we would go from Gmund to this artillery range called Grafenwehr, a German artillery range where they trained their tanks and their artillery.
So we were training a new German army.
We were training, no, we were training our army.
Our army, okay.
We were training our army at this German
As
Grafenwehr.
okay, as an occupying force.
And I would go from Gmund, where I lived with Charlotte, to Grafenwehr to train.
How far?
Oh, probably 50 miles.
A day?
No.
Oh.
We stayed up there.
Okay.
We stayed at Grafenwehr.
Charlotte's on the local economy in a house or an apartment.
In Gmund.
And her friends' social circle would be other officers' wives.
Yes. They had an officers' club, and of course
Right.
all the girls would go and play cards.
Whatever girls
and
do. How was the interaction with the local people?
They were very, very nice. They all kept saying that they weren't part of the Nazis. That
Even this 8 years later, they're
oh yeah, they just didn't.
I mean, they were friendly and accepting,
Oh.
and you'd go to town,
Oh yeah. No,
buy groceries or drink coffee or whatever you did.
No, there were no problems at all. And earlier, as I may have mentioned earlier, the German populace always indicated that they weren't any part of this Nazi thing. They weren't involved with Hitler, you know. They all told us that.
Right.
And when we went into these death camps earlier, in my story, when we went into these death camps, the military police were told by the our colonel in charge, go down into that town and get everybody who can walk, and walk them out here to see this. And the MPs did. They went into this town and they walked all these people, women, children, out to see the human beings in the ovens. And they all said, oh, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know. And as I frequently tell some of my friends when I tell them this story, what do you know about what's going on up at Fort Leonard Wood?
Yeah.
What do you know about what's going on up at Fort Leonard Wood?
Yeah.
And the people laugh and say, well, maybe they didn't know. But their husbands, their sons, had to have been working in these death camps. So they must have known.
Yeah.
But what could they do?
Exactly.
What could they do?
Exactly.
So all of a sudden, my wife is pregnant and's in Stuttgart. And my Skippy is born in Stuttgart.
All right. So would, just as a side note, would it be considered, since he was born in Germany, did he have dual citizenship?
Exactly.
He was a German and an American.
Exactly.
Could have chosen when he was 18, I guess, to be one or the other.
To be one of them.
Okay. How long were you in?
A year later, back in Stuttgart in the Army hospital, Susie is born.
Well, you weren't away from home all the time, were you?
No.
Okay.
And then
Skip.
Charlotte gets
Susie.
pregnant again. And then
Is this all happening in Germany?
I'm in Germany.
Okay.
Skippy, Susie. We go back to the States.
1956.
She's pregnant. We go to Massachusetts, where my mother and father lived. And when my mother saw little Skippy, little Susie, and Charlotte, she said, Teddy, what have you done to Charlotte?
Teddy. That's the first time you've mentioned Teddy.
Teddy. My name is Edward H., but they call me Teddy.
Why? Edward H.
I don't know. Now everybody calls me Skiff because my last name is Skiffington.
That's the first time you'd mentioned Teddy. All right, you're back in the States. It's probably 1956. What'd you do then?
What did I do then?
you've been in the Army since 42. You've been in the Army 14, 15 years. What did you do then?
I was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma,
Which is?
to teach in the artillery school.
So,
It's over in Oklahoma,
right.
outside of Oklahoma City, and outside of a little town called Lawton.
One of the main artillery locations, okay?
We are quartered on post. We are quartered on post.
All right, your job, you're a major, your job is training. What name of the job description?
Well, I was in materiel.
Materiel.
That
right.
was teaching how this artillery piece, the 105 artillery piece and other artillery pieces are made, and how they work.
Okay.
I was at Fort Sill on the base.
Uh,
Very good duty. My family, of course, is all there, all the kids.
right. Did you enjoy your tour in Germany?
Oh, yes.
And Fort Sill was good duty?
I've been very, very happy in the military.
That's
I
good
was
to hear.
always very, very glad.
How long were you at Fort Sill?
Fort Sill, that's a long time ago.
Well, ballpark.
I don't really remember. Probably two years. Probably.
Okay. Take us into about 1958, and you're in the military 15, 16, 17 years. Where'd you go after Fort Sill?
Then I'm ordered to go to an ROTC assignment at Missouri State University, which is now Missouri State University.
Right.
When I was assigned here in 1966, this would be 1966, I was assigned to SMS, which is now Missouri State University.
And not unusual at that time.
But this time I'm a lieutenant colonel. I've been promoted. I've been promoted, and I'm assigned to the ROTC, which they do at the end of your military career.
Not unusual to have that kind of
Oh,
duty.
no,
In 1966, it was a major source of commissioned officers all around the country.
All of the old
All right.
soldiers,
Did you?
officers were sent to ROTC duty before they retired.
Were you in charge?
So I was sent to what was then SMS,
Right, Southwest Missouri State.
and I was a lieutenant colonel at that time, and at that time, it was during the Vietnamese War.
Right.
All of the ROTC cadets had to take 2 years of ROTC.
Right. Land Grant College.
Yes.
Okay.
And I was a lieutenant colonel.
Were you in charge of the detachment?
No, they had a full colonel.
Okay.
He was a full colonel, and I was a second in command.
All right. Come to Southwest Missouri State, 1966. It was starting at the time when
Vietnamese War.
Vietnamese War, not a good time for the military, not good atmosphere. Did you have troubles at
I
Missouri
was
State?
in my uniform with all of my ribbons, but at SMS we didn't have any problems with anti-war.
Anti-war.
There was no anti-war
Good.
against the Vietnamese War, and there was no problems at all. And so now I'm getting old and gray, and they retired me. I asked to be retired, and I was retired with 25 years of active duty.
42 and 25 is 67. 1967, you've retired, 25 years. Had you ever heard of Springfield, Missouri before you came here?
Yes,
Okay.
I lived outside of Springfield, Massachusetts, in a little town called East Long Meadow,
Right, I remember the name from
Massachusetts.
Okay.
My home was in Massachusetts. My wife was from Colorado Springs. We both wanted to go back where we were born to be buried, because we are getting gray. But my 5 children said, no, 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 no. All our friends are here. Let's stay right here.
You came to Springfield with 5 children.
5 children.
Finished your time out at SMS and retired from the military.
Getting a fine pension from the military. Stayed at SMS. I taught at SMS. I left that out.
You did. What did you teach?
I taught business management.
Okay, was this
Yes.
after you retired?
Yes, I retired at SMS, and I was going back to Massachusetts to be buried, or to Colorado Springs with my wife to be buried with her. With the children, we have 5. By this time, we have 5.
Right.
Skip, Susie, then Stevie, and 2 others. We have 5.
Okay.
And
All right.
so I asked to retire, and I was going back to Massachusetts or Colorado Springs, but the people at the college said, stay here, you have 2 master's degrees, stay here and teach. At that time you didn't need a doctorate. And so I stayed right there and I taught business management for 20 years. Imagine, I went to 70.
Yeah. Where did you get your master's degrees?
George Washington University back in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
When I was stationed at Fort Monroe.
Okay.
When I was stationed at Fort Monroe, I had the 2 masters. That's where I got. I never did get the PhD.
Right.
So I have a military pension.
Right.
I have 20 years
At
in
SMS.
I
Right.
have Social Security.
You're making more money than you ever did.
I'm what they call a triple dipper.
Well, good.
My wife says, don't tell people
Good for
you're
you.
a triple dipper because some people just have Social Security. And I say, Charlotte, why didn't they work like I worked?
Good question. Well, Skip, it's been a pleasure having the opportunity to interview you, and I mean it with all sincerity. We appreciate your service to the country, and hopefully this series of interviews will be meaningful to your family, and they'll have a treasure they can have for a number of years.
You're going to give me a copy.
We are going to give you a copy.
That's
And
wonderful.
we appreciate
John, I
you.
want to thank you for running that camera.
Okay. We
And
appreciate
the stories I've told you are the truth.
appreciate your time. Thank you very much.